What are the top 3 things or challenges that family businesses have as they transition?
Family business is really tough. Communicating with family outside of a family business is hard. It's really hard to create alignment. And so if we can get to that alignment point where mom and dad, brothers and sisters all have a shared vision, then all of a sudden the other questions are easier to answer.
What got the company here isn't going to get the company there. What are some things that the next generation should be thinking about as they're thinking about their own careers?
It's the alignment piece. Why are you working here as a next generation member? Are you working here because it's expected? Or are you working here because you want to be here for a reason of your own?
I know for myself, when I'm working with my dad, I turn into a 13-year-old kid.
Well, one thing we teach is which hat are you wearing? So I'll actually have 3 hats up front. And you can actually put that B hat on and say, I'm having a conversation, Dad, about the business.
Diverse thinking to the podcast from a generational aspect.
Change doesn't have to be overwhelming. Once you've made change, your mind knows how to make change.
At any stage of our lives, we are unstoppable. We're excited to hear from our guest, Jon Keimig. He's the executive director of the Family Business Center at University of St. Thomas, which is a national leader in education for family businesses. There's a lot of stories I'm sure you can share with us, Jon, on how you've seen family businesses have to change and evolve as you work with them through that educational platform. But I'm curious about you as a person and your journey there as the director and the obstacles or how you got to where you're at and how's it going in really being able to be that ear and eyes for family businesses.
Well, thanks, Lori, for having me, and Tyler and Michelle. It's awesome to be with you guys today. My story started with nothing to do with family business. I was a TV journalist by trade, and so I was taught to be curious, to understand topics of importance to an audience, to gather the right facts and opinions and present it in a way where people got to choose what to do with that information. That to me makes a good news story. And so now, a couple careers later, I'm using those same skills with family businesses. I'm finding out what are the topics of importance. How do we present it with the right facts and opinions? And every family is different, has a different history, values, vision. And so how do they take that information and say, hey, this is something that could work for us, or this is something that maybe doesn't work for us?
Well, and it's interesting because our focus here is we've got generations represented with ourselves. And I have to imagine your conversations are lots of generational conversation with those family businesses.
They are. And I think, generational conversations are one of the toughest aspects of being in a family business. So I think, I always come back to everything being around conversation and how do we talk about things in family business? And because family business is really tough, communicating with family outside of a family business is hard.
Yeah. So, Jon, much of our audience are family business owners and leaders. And so if you were to look back over the course of the last 8 years and the businesses you've worked with, what are like the top 2 or 3 things or challenges that family businesses have as they transition?
After every event, we survey our family businesses on pain points they're dealing with. And one, even pre-pandemic, has been hiring. So I think that's just kind of a common business thing, especially in Minnesota, around getting the right skilled employees for work. The other things have been around transition planning and around family dynamics and communication. So again, I go back to, communication's hard. It's hard in a family and it's really hard in a business. And we often don't have all of our feelings spoken out. And if we're not speaking our feelings and really our desires and where we want to go, then it's really hard to create alignment. And so if we can get to that alignment point where mom and dad, brothers and sisters all have a shared vision, or at least understood a spoken and hopefully written down purpose and plan, then all of a sudden the other questions are easier to answer. And that's where the success comes. But when there isn't that alignment, that's when families come in and they're really sometimes struggling on, how to get everybody on the same page.
So, Jon, a question that I have, we talk a lot about how it's hard to work with family. It's hard to work with friends. A big thing is the communication part. If it's your dad telling you something to do and he's technically your boss, it's a lot harder to take. Or if you got a buddy working with you and he's not doing his job, what strategies did you learn, did you have to do and use when it came to communicating with friends, family in the business world?
So I think in the business world, one thing we teach is which hat are you wearing? So when I teach a class on family business governance, I'll actually have three hats up front, and they're different sports teams, but one says F, one says B, and one says O. And you can actually put that B hat on. It's the Boston Red Sox because that's what I bought, and say, I'm having a conversation, Dad, about the business. But instead of saying that, you're probably saying, Hey, Jim, I'm having a conversation about the business, right? Or you put on that family hat and you say, Hey, Dad, I want to have a conversation about, plans for the weekend. And so trying to really separate those three key aspects of family, business, and ownership can help when we're going into a conversation. So we're not thinking about maybe how you felt wronged by a sibling at work. That sibling is a colleague who wronged you at work, and you're going to your boss about that.
I'm sitting here resonating with everything you're saying, John, because I've helped family businesses for the last 20 years make those transitions, but I've also been a part of a family business myself, and so I can relate to some of those challenges with working with different leaders. What are ways that you get family members working together and being able to put on different hats? Because sometimes I know for myself, when I'm working with my dad, I turn into a 13-year-old kid.
It's the alignment piece. Why are you working here as a next generation member? Are you working here because it's a job? Are you working here because it's expected? Or are you working here because you want to be here for a reason of your own? And so maybe that reason of your own is to carry that business forward because you're so proud of your heritage and the legacy that was created by a grandparent. But if you're there because you feel you have to be there because of your last name, it's probably not going to be a great 4 decades, right? And so we wanna make sure that families understand family business, when done well, can be an absolutely incredible thing. But if not done well, we've seen succession, right? That's the far over there side, and that can happen.
Mhm. And how long advance do you recommend families start working together to plan transition?
We always say 5 to 10 years to plan a transition. And thank you for using the word transition and not succession. Succession is this ever ongoing process that never really ends in hopes of you doing that well enough that you don't feel a big hit on a transition day. When the CEO steps out, everybody's known about it for a year or whatever that is. Or if there's a change in ownership, we don't feel that throughout the company. That's good succession planning. So we mitigate the change in the transitions. For a lot of families, it's helpful to bring in an outside advisor to help with that communication. That can help a lot with, especially cross-generational topics, to bring somebody in neutral third party to really lay things out there and get everybody going in the same direction.
And talk about what are some of the things that you focus on in that 5 to 10-year period, because that may seem like a long time for business owners. I know the business owners we work with, they're like, "I don't need that much time." Most of them wait till the year before.
Yeah.
And I used to get frustrated by that, but then 7 years ago when I found myself unexpectedly in a transition because my husband passed away unexpectedly, and I didn't have my own plan put together, I
Yeah.
realized that if I've been doing this for 20 years, I don't have my own plan put together. Well, no wonder other business leaders don't take the time. And so,
Mhm.
talk to us about what's important about that 5 to 10 years and what are some of the things that you're working on during that time?
I think structures is one of the big things. You have somebody that's kind of a key decision maker in a family business. Well, who's going to take that over when they transition out? Is it a group of people? Is it a different person? Is it a board? What is the governance that we want to have, that we need to have going forward, that we're willing to have? So when we look at potential owners, do we bring in a non-family owner? Do we need that? Are we deciding that this is only family members by blood or that spouses can be owners? How do we start to have those questions ahead of that transition? Do mom and dad want to step out of the day to day of the business but maintain ownership? Do they still want a role? Are they expecting a role in retirement, with air quotes, because sometimes they retire and sometimes this is kind of their thing and they just can't really step away from it. But how do we even talk about that piece and understanding to give the next generation, once they've proven themselves and developed the ability to lead the organization, what is the role that they could use mom and dad in to support that? as opposed to maybe mom or dad having some expectations of what that role still looks like. So again, it just comes back to that conversation and even writing down across generations. Hey, mom, dad, this is the expectations we have of you. Hey, mom and dad, say this is the expectations we have of the next generation, and to be open and talk about that so we can come to agreements on things. And we might not agree, but at least it's out there. I think oftentimes with family business, we need to put things out there in a positive, safe manner, which again sometimes means a third party coming in to help with that. But if we can put expectations out there and come from that place of love and desire for good for each other, then we can start down the right path. Everything comes from our values, and hopefully the values of mom and dad are passed down at the dinner table. Now once you get to a third, fourth generation, our values are going to change a little bit, as we've had people from outside that family clan get married in, and different experiences working in outside the business. But if we can start to take our personal values, discuss them, and then identify key things in our family business history and values that were at play in our family business history. Sometimes a family will share how, the company screwed something up decades and decades ago, and they took 5, 10 years to make it right for a customer. Now that's a value that we can continue to talk about and push forward decades later, that we always do the right thing. And so when we have stories like that in our history, it's easy for the next generation, especially if they can tie it to grandma or grandpa, to say this is who we are. I love my grandparents and my parents. I see this as being a prevalent value. If we're not talking about those things and showing those things in how we do business and how we operate our families, then we can start to have some misalignment there. So I do think starting with values is a big thing, and to also start by having a family meeting where we're not talking about the day to day of the business, but we're talking about that business of the family. What's important to us as a family? Where do we want this thing to be 100 years from now when we're all gone? What's that legacy piece? And how do we start to think positively towards that legacy piece? And sometimes, the family says, hey, this is just a lifestyle business. And that's great. And so we don't need to worry about some legacy piece. But if we're talking about that and we're discussing that, then we can align within that.
That brings up a really good point. I know, so I'm a part of a family office, and it was established probably about 11 years ago. And I remember we sat down with our family and just first of all started by asking my mom and dad what their dreams were. Then they kind of turned to us and said, "What are your visions for this going forward?" And then we talked about the values, and we were able to use common words that I grew up with that my kids maybe have never heard. So our values are the golden rule, the Kluver way, and it sounds like those are some of the kind of experiences that you provide for families.
We certainly try to use that same model that your family did. And what's great about that is that you can pass those values on to Tyler, to your niece, and they don't have to join the family business to use those same values and be successful in whatever it is they're trying to do. And that's a great outcome. Now, if we're using them in the family business, then personally, I like that a little more, right? With my role. But, when we can get families to share positive values and talk about them and have them written out, I don't see any negatives coming from that.
And I think I really do think it's so important. Even if it's not a family business, it's so important to emphasize putting what you want, your goal, the outcomes, just all that, the values for it, and sharing that with your team. But Jon, you mentioned earlier before we got on here, and you talked a little bit about how not all change is actually a bad thing. Do you want to speak a little bit more on that?
Change can be really hard, especially in a maybe a business that's 100 years old. But there's a saying in family business that for 3 generations you needed one idea, and now one generation needs three. So change has to be part of what takes place. And it can be hard. Anyone who's changed a job or a role, or, you know, my Achilles heel gets a new technology put in front of them, right? Change can be really hard, but we have to spend time kind of in that mucky middle maybe, and be stuck in it and figure it out and understand how the change is a positive thing. And then we can blast through that and build on that change and take it into a new direction. So change has to be there. It has to ever be evolving, especially today. We're doing a topic on AI this year because that's a huge change that is facing business owners, family or not. How do business leaders push that change down through the organization? I think sometimes it might get pushed back up through the organization, and it's having that open mind and that open ear and understanding that different people are bringing diverse ideas and new concepts because there's so much going on in the world around us that we have to be open to change, but we also have to be open to the right change. And we have to know when we can look at some change and say, that might not be right based on who we are, what our values are, and where we're trying to go.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I mean, especially because what got the company here isn't going to get the company there, right? And so we need the next generation of leaders to kind of capture a vision and run with it while maintaining what needs to be preserved from the past. So I think that's so important. But one change that I've really thought a lot about recently is just the change of leadership style from one generation to the next. My dad and I had the opportunity to work together in one of our investment companies 3 years ago, and I was leading as the interim CEO. He was a board member, and when I would go to him, he'd give me advice based on how he would lead, and that's not how I'm wired. And so I know, as wanting to please him, I wanted to kind of be who he was wanting me to be. But at the same time, I knew as a business coach that I needed to be me. And so I think I see that dynamic a lot in business transitions where second generation or third generation maybe is wired differently than the previous generation. How do you address that in your workshops?
Well, we try to tell them just that things will change and that, leadership styles will change. What's interesting about a family business is that, the tenure of a CEO leadership averages 18 years. And in a public company, it's 4 to 6. So there's a lot less change typically in the leadership of a family business. And when people get rooted into, the understandings and how the leadership of the company operates, it can be a big culture shock. We think about some of the public companies we hear about that, oh, they've got a new CEO, and within 6 months we hear about a whole new, group of vice presidents too. And we just don't see that as much in family business. So I think the change aspect is a little bit less. You hope that we've again talked about those values and a shared purpose and vision, that the leadership style might be different, but people aren't going to necessarily question the motives of a next generation family business leader as they step into, a more prominent, maybe president or CEO role. One of the things we've seen too is that a member of the next generation steps into a role as president while mom or dad maintains that title of CEO. Maybe if they've got a board, becomes a chair of the board. So it kind of softens that transition a little bit, and they're still around. A number of our families, when mom or dad have transitioned out, they still say that, I have a cup of coffee every Tuesday morning or whatever it is. And I think having a cup of coffee or setting up a regular time to meet with an outgoing leader can really help steady things and keep some of the positive aspects that leader had, and identify what makes sense based on the next gen's personality.
Yeah. And then
Mhm.
you bring up a
Mhm.
great point about it takes time for that next generation to be ready to step into that role. And so for companies to really make sure that they're taking the time to prepare, which is why sometimes 10
Mhm.
years is important, right? One of the roles that we play at VisionOne is we do interim C-level services, and we'll often step into a leadership role for a company while working with that next generation leader to help them get ready. How can you speak to like the getting the next generation ready? What are some of the things that your organization does to help them get ready for leadership?
One of the best things we've done is we've started peer groups. And so we've got 6 of them going right now, might have 8 next year. But our most popular one is our next gen peer groups. And we've got 3 of them and likely a fourth coming on board. So it's an opportunity for members of the next generation who, vary in age from 25 to 50, to be in group with people in similar roles and to have those expertly facilitated by family business advisors. But I sat in on one of our groups and facilitated that last week. And these are some super smart people that are facing some tough issues, but they have become such great friends and colleagues through this experience, that they chime in, and sometimes someone will say, "Hey, so and so, you've lived this experience, you bring that experience in and share." And so it's been a great thing to have members of the next generation not feel alone in their role. I think, they say that being an entrepreneur is lonely. I think being a family business leader is likely lonelier.
Yes.
And so
Because
we
you
give
can't go to
them.
your family when you're mad at family.
Yeah, and, sometimes you go to your spouse who's not in the business, and that doesn't help, right? We all go to our spouse or partner, but, that might just create a wedge. And sometimes what happens too with family business is that you can bring an issue home to your partner, and they develop a way of thinking about the issue, and then maybe the next day the issue gets solved, but you didn't tell your spouse about that. Well, they still think there's an issue there. So it does become really isolating. And one of the big things I've tried to do with our family business center is to make a community of family businesses where people can come into a room, look around, see 200 other people from family businesses and say, I am not alone in this. And do it in an environment where we kind of poke the bear a little bit. But it's okay to poke the bear because they look around, they see 200 other people that are in this same situation. So now we've normalized some tough conversations. That's where the magic happens when people say, okay, here's a topic I didn't think we needed to talk about, I didn't know about, or I knew we needed to talk about, but didn't know how to raise it. And now we're doing it in a safe space. And we're doing it with a bunch of other people that are going through it too. So now I feel normal and comfortable through this change.
Yeah, that's a great point because our most, a lot of times our spouse or partner is, the trusted person we can go to. But if you're not able to go to that person because you don't want to put a wedge in family dynamics, that makes it
Right.
even lonelier.
Well, and it's just exciting to hear you talk about the importance of community, of
Yeah.
bringing, surrounding yourself with like-minded people or people you can share those experiences with, whether it's family business, a business leader, but just that you're not alone.
Yep.
Yep,
Let
absolutely.
let's stay on the topic of the next generation. I know that, what we're seeing in our work with transition planning is we're seeing less and less of that next generation being
Mhm.
interested. I know in my own family business, my own kids are kind of have that same mindset. They want to go do their thing and they don't necessarily want to learn about the family business. Talk to me about what are some of the ways that you're engaging the next generation and what are some things that the next generation should be thinking about as they're thinking about their own careers?
Well, I think, historically we would have companies like Tom Johnson and Sons Plumbing, right? Every one of Tom Johnson's sons assumed he was going to become a plumber. And now things have changed so much. We've got so many women who are leading family businesses within our program. Um, and men and women are sending their kids to college to get educated. And most kids go to college and they don't want to be at home working for mom and dad. Some of them, that's their plan right away. And so there is this kind of push pull within academics around, should somebody go work somewhere else first? And what does that look like? Do they need to cut their teeth for 3, 5 years, get a promotion, work within the same industry? There's been some recent research that shows that there's a lot of value in that. But if that next gen member stays away too long and they come back later, they're missing out on company culture. They're missing out on those shared values that are at play. And it can get a little rocky if they're coming in at maybe 35 or 40 saying, okay, I'm the next gen here. Now it's my opportunity to lead versus somebody that maybe came in when they're 25, 26, 27 and has started at the bottom, worked in all areas of the business. Um, I, I like to say that there is no best practice in family business because everybody's journey is unique to them, and what works for one might not work for another. And so some families will say, when you're 18, we've got a spot for you. And others will say, you need to go away and prove yourself and come back as CEO material. So, what's right? I couldn't tell you, but that's again where we have to go back to those family conversations because ideally, the next generation understands the business at a high level that they could be a potential future owner, whether or not they have some business background and business acumen, but also know that what it takes to work there, and to have that conversation with the owning generation and say, what is a path here? Is there a path into the business, or what does that look like? And am I leadership material? Do I want to be leadership material? Because not everybody wants to lead.
I can relate with that. So growing up, my dad had a manufacturing company. He grew and he said, "You go make your own way." And then when he sold that company, he said, "Now that you've made your own way, Michelle and brothers, now come together and take that experience and let's start this family office." And so that was really the birth of our family office. But we all had our day jobs. And so it's been really hard to really take the time to invest in that because of that. So that I can see where there's that dynamic of it was good to go and kind of make your way, but then it is hard to come back. So we're hoping our next generation really does that. So I want to turn the question to you, Tyler, as the
That's
next generation. What questions do you have for Jon as kind of a next generation leader of a family business?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, the biggest question that I think about all the time and that I'm kind of thinking now, and this doesn't even have to relate specifically to family business, but more to the next generation of leaders. We just had like a career fair at my school. And at this career fair, you go up to a bunch of different booths that are different companies. They have people out there. You give them a resume, you talk to them. And the question that I have for you is, when you're looking at these next generation leaders, what are some of the most important things that they should be able to do, say, anything that stand out that people should know to kind of have locked down?
Great question. I think, to me, it is about personality. It is about working with others. It is about understanding others and using empathy, and understanding where people are coming from. That, to me, is how we build trust within an organization. Using curiosity too, to understand why things are done a certain way, and not necessarily coming in saying, "I've got the right way." And those are the skills I think that employers are looking for, and I think mom and dad and grandma and grandpa are looking for in that next generation, to carry that on, and start to carve your path. And the other thing I'd say is maybe you're somebody in the next generation is set because they're in the family business. I want to be the CEO. I want to be the president. But for others, learn and work different roles within the company, and you might find something years later that you say, you know what, my passion's actually over here. That can be something where the family can tap into a passion that maybe it hadn't looked at before, but as the company keeps evolving, maybe that's something that's really needed. My grandmother had a plate that would be like on a wall behind me, and it said, "Grant me patience, Lord, but hurry." And I always remember that, right? We want it to go fast and get to that point, but we learn so much through the process. And that's where we can develop the skills that it takes to really be a leader. So, one of our longtime family businesses that was part of our program had a similar story where mom and dad started the business, grew it very large. Their kids moved away, got married, lived in the Twin Cities. They were not. And they came home at Thanksgiving time, and dad talked about a sale that fell through. And the kid said, "Whoa, sale? What about us?" And he said, "Well, you guys moved away, started your families." And they said, "Well, yeah, but you never asked us." And so there's this big disconnect between when we don't talk about those big issues from the kid's point of view of saying, "Hey, mom, dad, we're interested. Can we have a conversation?" And from mom and dad's point of view, to invite the kids or tell them, "Hey, we're thinking about selling the business that has our last name on it." That's where anytime I meet a business owner that doesn't have kids working in the business, I always tell them, have the conversation with your kids. Tell them about the business. And maybe that's something that they really want to take over, and maybe you can work that out. If this isn't a legacy thing and you're doing it because you think this is fun and this is in your wheelhouse, to share that with the next generation too is hugely important, because then people aren't coming necessarily saying, "Oh, I want my shot at it." And they might not understand either how risky it was for you to buy a business, to run it for that long, and to go through that process. But, the more we can talk about those things and set expectations, maybe in one case, it's that kid comes up and says, "Hey, I really want this," and maybe it's a great fit, and maybe it's not. But to at least have that conversation of where it could go, I think that's a real win.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if you were to give our audience one or two nuggets of core advice as parting wisdom, what would it be?
There are pain points that are in every family and in every business. And if we can start to address those in a positive way, you have a chance to create something really incredible. I heard somebody say that we get to spend 19 years with our kids, 18 years when they live at home, and basically a week a year for the rest of our lives. I've got 3 kids and I don't have a family business, and my oldest is 13. I'm looking at 6 more years. That's a little pessimistic, but there's some reality in that. Maybe it's not 19, maybe it's 20, it's 21. But if you're working together until the kid's 45 and mom and dad are 65, 70, wow, that can be really magical.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's awesome. John, just so many rich nuggets. And I always love referring business over to the Family Business Center because you do such a wonderful job. But I think today my biggest takeaways are number one, family business is hard and we need to talk about it. We need to talk, right? So to get out and talk. I heard you say start early because, transitions and readiness take time. um, the one thing that really struck me is it's just a conversation. Like you really boiled it down to just have a conversation. And then finally the fact that you talked about how it can really be lonely, especially as a family business owner, because you can't always bring in some of your trusted partners or advisors to those conversations. And so don't go it alone. So get into a peer group or a network of other family businesses that can help you so that it doesn't feel so lonely at the top. So just wonderful, wonderful takeaways from today. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Unstoppable. We hope this episode left you inspired, maybe ready to take that first step, to face some challenges, start getting unstuck, have a conversation, and start to make some desired change happen in your life, in your business, and in your community. Here at VisionOne High Performance, we are passionate. We're passionate about helping business leaders, organizations, and communities in effectively navigating critical change, such as growing your business, getting your business ready to exit, getting yourself ready for your next chapter, transitioning to the next generation of leadership. Imagine having a team that's working beside you every step of the way, providing strategic planning, fractional HR services, and it's tailored for you. That's what VisionOne High Performance is about and what we offer. So if you're interested in learning more about how we can help you get unstuck, be unstoppable, and make big changes, let's connect. Maybe it's through an unstoppable peer group, internal workshop, a retreat. But let's start the conversation. So I invite you to check in at our website at visiononeperformance.com.